Hey, all. Welcome to Now We're Talking with Doug Padgett. Thanks for being a part of the podcast. My interview today is with Vivien Hoexter. Vivien and her business partner, Linda Hartley, have written a book called Big Impact: Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. They interviewed nonprofit leaders from a whole series of the social sectors, and they talked about some of the principles that they learned. It's fascinating. It's excellent. Whether you're a nonprofit leader or any kind of a leader of an organization or just someone who's thinking about your own work, I think the book would be of great benefit to you. So take a look at it. Our conversation today really focuses around the role of nonprofits and how they function in the world, not just religious ones, but the big nonprofits as well. So I hope you find it interesting. It's a terrific conversation from my vantage point, and the book is called Big Impact. So you probably know what I'm going to say. If you want to make a big impact on Now We're Talking with Doug Padgett podcast, head on over to Patreon. You can get there at dougpadgett.com. Click and become one of the patrons of the work we're doing. Hey, by the way, this podcast brought to you by Greater Things, the organization that I run. You can find that at greaterthings.us if you haven't already. So here it is, my conversation with Vivien Hoexter on her book, Big Impact: Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. All right, all on Facebook and listen to the podcast. Welcome. Now we're talking with Doug Padgett, and I'm talking with Vivien Hoexter. Hey, see, I just did it right there. I know we just talked about Vivien, how you pronounce your name. And
Yes.
I just glitched on it right at the start. I'm like, what did she just tell me about how she pronounces her name? It's spelled, for those on the podcast, Hoexter. And Vivien and her co-author, Linda Hartley, are the authors of the book, Big Impact: Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. Congratulations on the book. It's a great accomplishment.
Thank you so much. We're really thrilled. There were times when we didn't think it was going to get done, but we kept going.
That's a big deal.
Honestly, if you told us beforehand how much work it was going to be, I'm not sure we would have gone for it, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did it as well. So congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's a great project. So Vivien, you spent a lot of time in the book is with its subtitle, Insights and Stories from America's Nonprofit Leaders. Mm-hmm. You spent some time inside the brains and the hearts and the emotions of nonprofit leaders.
Yes, we did.
And we can talk about the content of the book here in a bit. And you have 8 brilliant insights about being a nonprofit leader. But to tell me right off the bat, what do you think, is there something that makes nonprofit leaders particular? Did you find anything in the course of these hundreds of interviews that you did where you started to say, these nonprofit leaders, there's something about them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we did find that a large percentage of them had some personal tragedy or grave difficulty relatively early in their lives that had really sort of driven them in the direction of service. It was well over 20%, which was quite surprising to us. So, for example, Larry Kramer, who runs the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, lost his father at an early age and then lost his stepfather when he was still relatively young. And from that, he learned the importance of relationships, and that's what led him to this, eventually to run the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. So that's just one example.
Yeah.
Tara Perry, who runs the National Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children, which represents foster children in court, was herself a foster child.
Oh.
So there really is this kind of thread of personal experience that has led these leaders who clearly could have done very well in the corporate world to abandon it or never go there in the first place and try to change the world, right? To make the world a better place.
So, this is I'm a nonprofit leader myself, right? I operate a nonprofit organization. I also pastor a church, which is a version of nonprofit. So I'm all in to nonprofits. And so this is a question sort of coming from a nonprofit leader, right? To people who've studied across the impact. Do nonprofits actually change the world? Like this is a deep question we all have. Like, is that really how it goes? It feels like, we're the ones pushing the rock up the hill, and then this mudslide happens, and all these other forces, policy, government policy forces, business innovation, seem like they really make this huge impact.
Right.
What did you find in these? Am I the only one wondering that? And what did you find as an answer to that question?
Not at all. And I think what you said about business and government, right, is the key, because in my opinion, nonprofits are often innovating at the level of making people's lives better. Mm-hmm. And what we know, because now 10% of the U.S. workforce works in the nonprofit sector, so that's not an insignificant
Is that right?
number.
Oh, I had no idea it was that high.
No. So it's pretty high, but the key is that unless those messages or those solutions can get from the nonprofit sector and get adapted usually by government, right, but also by the corporate world, then they're not going to have the impact that they should. And that's why one of our principles, you mentioned that there are 7 principles in the book about how to make social change. One of them is build broad-based coalitions, meaning coalitions that cut across sectors, because the really savvy nonprofit leaders have learned that they can't go it alone and that they really have to partner. So the Fred Blackwell, who runs the San Francisco Foundation, which is one of the largest community foundations in the U.S., is really focused on building a coalition of corporations and nonprofits and the government in the San Francisco Bay Area to really have an impact on the price of housing and the affordability of the Bay Area. So I think that's my take on changing the world from the nonprofit sector.
You have a lot of expertise, and you are the co-partner in the H2. What's it called? The
H2 growth strategies.
So you work with nonprofit leaders, but also business leaders, and you have a lot of expertise. Is there a certain kind of person you think that should be a nonprofit leader? Is that if someone's thinking about what they should do in their life, and maybe they're reaching a point where they can make a change, or they're starting out their work life, is this something someone should say, hey, if you're a certain kind of individual, nonprofit work is where you should find yourself? Is it enough of a category, or do you feel like it's?
So I think to me the answer there has to do with mission, and because most of the functions in the nonprofit sector, finance, accounting, IT, human resources, those are the same functions that are happening in the corporate world. And, in the nonprofit sector, we have, instead of sales, we have fundraising, right?
I'm running one on Saturday, so I know all about it.
There you go.
Anxious as can be, yep.
So I think in that sense, the thing that really differentiates people who work in the nonprofit sector is their mission focus. So what I discovered early in my career is, I have an MBA from Wharton in marketing, and I was in the corporate world for about 10 years. And I was pretty good at it, but I discovered early on that what was missing for me from that work was the mission, the missions that I cared about. And what I discovered was that most of the missions I really cared about were being focused on in the nonprofit sector. And that's why I came into the nonprofit sector.
Doesn't somebody else famous have a business degree from Wharton School of Business?
Doug. Now be nice.
Somebody else, has that devalued or increased the value of that degree? I don't know who I'm thinking of. Okay. So in the book, you extracted from all these many interviews, people across many different kinds of nonprofit leaders, some principles, and you put those together. I counted 8, but you say there's 7, so I must have added an extra one. Did you start out by saying we want to find leaders and have them fit into the 7 categories that we think make the insights for nonprofit leaders? How did that come about?
So, so we started out doing interviews with provocative questions, right? So things like, what's the worst and best thing that ever happened to you, and what did you learn from them, right? Or what keeps you up at night? Or so we intentionally asked questions that we thought might get at answers that would not ordinarily come from these people, right? In a sort of a public setting. And then we had 47 of them, 47 of these interviews. And so we had a huge amount of content, right? But one of the things that Linda and I do in our professional lives is interview. We interview stakeholders of nonprofits all the time. And, board members, staff members, whether we're doing a strategic plan or a capital campaign feasibility study. So we're talking to a lot of different people. And then we're looking across the interviews to see what the themes are. Now, I will tell you that even with that, we spent months sort of racking our brains for, we have some themes here. They weren't yet the principles, right? They were just themes about, a number of people had said this and another number had said that, and a certain percentage had done this. And actually, the light bulb went on in a conversation with a very smart college friend of mine who is in the corporate world. And when we were describing what we'd done and what we'd found, she said, "Vivien, this book is about social change." And we're like, "Oh, really? Is that what it's about?" And she's one of those people. She just has a brilliant marketing mind, right? And she didn't even have to read the whole thing, right, to come to that conclusion. We were just talking to her about it, and she said, if I wanted to know how to make change in my community, I would turn to these leaders who are some of whom are having great success in their respective areas. And I would want to find out how they did it. And what is the good news, right? Because, we have had a lot of bad news in the last year or two, right? But particularly the last year. And one of the things that we really wanted to highlight was that there's a lot of good news in social change, right? And it's often happening kind of at the local level or the regional level. And because these are nonprofits and they don't have a lot of advertising and marketing dollars, the word's not getting out.
The story doesn't
the way
get out.
It needs to. And that's maybe the primary reason that we wrote this book, is that we wanted to amplify the voices of these leaders whom we think are spectacular. And many of, we've worked with a number of them over the years. And we wanted to really have their stories be known. Because another thing that I find, or that we find, is that in the sector, because of the lack of sharing of information and amplifying of voices, someone will come up with a great solution. And because no one else knows about it, those other people will start trying to reinvent the wheel because they think there's no good solution. And so we really wanted to sort of combat that phenomenon. And that's really why we wrote the book.
So in the list of the big categories that you found, the patterns that you recognize, the one I'd say the one that surprised me is not there.
Oh, okay.
Which I, as a nonprofit leader, I feel like I spend so much time thinking about, which is raise more money, right? Like that's the thing that a lot of leaders spend their time thinking about: raise more money and hire good staff.
Right.
It's all. I know that you know that raising money is important, but it's interesting that what can feel like the most important thing to a not, the most urgent, pressing thing, raise money and secure your future so that you can accomplish the work you want to accomplish. That's not one of the pieces of advice that you got from all these interviews. It's almost like that's impacted by these other things.
Right. Well, so we have there's a sub principle called raise seed capital, right? So that, but it didn't rise to the level of an overall arching principle.
Yeah.
And this is despite the fact that Linda and I, many of our clients we're working with them on fundraising, right? That's a lot of what we do.
Yeah. Because that's what nonprofit leaders worry about, right?
Yes, exactly. And I guess our feeling about that is that if you do these other things, right? And particularly if you, and this is principle number 3, if you're crystal clear about your goal and you articulate it persuasively, that the raising of the money, it's not that it's easy. Look, it's never easy to raise money. But that all of these other things are sort of prerequisites or precursors to the raising of the money. And again, I don't want to minimize that, not at all. But the other thing that we find often in our practice is that, I do a lot of strategic planning with clients, and often we'll go into a client and a potential client, and the CEO will say, we need to raise more money.
Yeah.
Right. That's the presenting problem. Right. And it's certainly true. And then we find that, for example, there is no plan. Right. So there's no vision, or at least not an articulated one. And there are no clear goals and no idea about how much it's going to cost to achieve those goals and what the impact's going to be. Right.
It's so refreshing. I thought that was just me. It's good to know that there's other people who feel that same thing is happening to them.
And that's one of the things that makes us not unique, but unusual as a firm, right? Is that we because we do strategic planning, we can recognize when this is the case, right? That there isn't an adequate plan, and sometimes we kind of get into it by going in through the back door, namely creating the case for support. Why is it that someone should support my organization or your organization? And that's sort of, that can be like, and or even to do that, you have to have a vision and a plan and some, funding opportunities, right? Because funding opportunities come out of the plan, right?
Yeah.
And how much it's going to cost comes out of the budget for the plan. So again, it's really not at all that we are discounting it. It's just that we thought that other things were important as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And that's what I found so refreshing, because even though as a leader, you might think that the presenting issue is raising money, it's actually these other things and helping people to recognize that that's the case. What surprised you most? What was maybe the lesson that you included in the 7 or something else over the course of this project?
Well, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. It was incredibly inspiring to talk to these leaders. Really, really, I mean, just the wisdom in them is just phenomenal, right? And for that alone, they deserve to be heard, right? But and in that vein, right, there's scores of books on corporate leadership, right? Yeah. Hundreds of them if you go on Amazon, but very, very few on nonprofit leadership. Yeah. And so one of the other things that was so surprising to us was how willing people were to talk to us. So in a couple of cases, we knew the people, right? So we had prior relationships with them, the leaders. But in most cases, we did not.
Oh.
And so we were going in cold in most cases.
Is that right?
It is. And I think we only had maybe 1 or 2 turndowns. And that only because, like we wanted to talk to Darren Walker at the Ford Foundation. Now, Darren Walker's like a rock star at the moment, right? So we talked to Hillary Pennington, who's one of his direct reports. But really, we were just tremendously affirmed and to know that they wanted to do it. And I think the reason is that what I was saying earlier about not having the marketing and the advertising dollars and not being able to get the word out. And so they really want to tell their stories, right? And they really want people to know what they're up to.
So do you think that you've in the book is great if people want access to these high capacity leaders that run big nonprofits? You've mentioned some of them, the kind that you hear when you listen to National Public Radio, right, as funders. big dollar, big backed nonprofits that organize and fund other nonprofits. Is there anything different about the small ones or the mid-sized ones, the ones that have a real community kind of focus, or they're working in a particular neighborhood without all the other support that so many big nonprofits have? Because it feels like in that world, like it is in business, that the small organizations feel like they're really different than the big complicated ones. Do you think that's true? Is it true that the small ones are all that different, or are they really doing the same thing?
That's a great question. So I'm sure you know that of the million plus public charities in the U.S., fully 80% of them have budgets under $1 million.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a huge percentage. And a lot of our clients fall in not so much the million and under, but like the 5 million, 10 million, which is already pretty large for a nonprofit.
Yeah.
But we also have worked with some startups, a few. And what I would say is that nonprofit startups resemble corporate startups in the sense that the founder does everything in the beginning. And then the founder maybe is able to raise some seed funding, right? And is able to hire one or two other people, but still having to do most things him or herself. And so in that sense, I think the smaller ones are more like startups or mom and pop shops, right? Where if they tend to be driven by the passion of one person initially, right? And so that person, often becomes the organization, right? Becomes so synonymous with the organization that they totally represent it. And what we find, and we've also worked with some of these organizations, is that the organizations that are able to make it from that first stage, like the founding stage, to the sort of second stage, if you will, continuing the corporate analogy, the ones where the founder is able to let go at the right moment.
Wow. Yeah. So hard.
It is very, very difficult. And I've never tried to do it myself, so I can only imagine how difficult it is. But that really is what distinguishes the organizations that make it successfully from founding to second stage.
So a lot of the mid-sized ones and small ones, their way of securing money is to ask individuals that they know to support their effort. And I know the big ones do that. Some of the larger ones do that as well. This is a freebie softball question, perhaps, or maybe it's more complicated than that. Is that a wise investment for someone to chip into a nonprofit? Like, is that a smart thing for the friend of someone who's starting a nonprofit to say, yeah, here's $100 or $1,000 or something? Does that really pay off? Does it work? Is it a good thing for someone to do?
Again, so this is kind of like if you invest in early stage companies, right? The return is, a lot of them fail. Right now, I'm not saying that the nonprofit's going to fail necessarily, but certainly, and they tend to have in startups, they have like they're called friends and family rounds of investment, right? So I would say that without friends and family, a lot of these nonprofits are never going to get off the ground. So in that sense, if you care about the person who is starting the organization and you think that it's a good idea, right? In other words, you shouldn't put your money into something that seems frivolous to you. But if there's a real need, then absolutely, and you have the $100 to spare, go for it.
Yeah, it's a big deal for people in the smaller operations to try to look legitimate. And to look like they're making enough impact, right? Because that whole goal question, which you do a great job with the stories in the book, the whole idea that make sure your goal is crystal clear and that you can articulate your outcomes. Well, a lot of new projects or even smaller nonprofits don't feel like the outcomes have enough shine to them, right? They feel like, well, it's really important, the work we do, but it's not all that sexy. It's not the kind of thing that really captures attention, or that someone's going to write a news story about, maybe a Facebook status, but probably not a story. Do you have any advice for the leaders who feel like the work that they do is important, but not all that sexy in how they articulate their goals? Because I talk to a lot of them, and they often feel self-conscious. Like I was talking with a woman who runs a program in Tennessee, and it's a small food shelf that fills the gap in between, like the 19th or 20th of the month and the end of the month. There's a lot of people whose public support runs out. So that's the work they do. And so she has this small sliver of what she does, and she feels like it's not all that dramatic compared to the bigger nonprofits that are like working for affordable housing, or they're coming up with new banking systems, or they're changing, the removing lead from people's walls and paint in their house or from their pipes, like really big things. She's like, we help 35 families get over the hump, and it feels real. I think it's fantastic what she's doing.
Yes,
but to her, when she's articulating her goals and outcomes,
right,
it feels to her like it's small. Do you see what I'm getting at? Do you know that?
I do, and it's uncanny, because this morning, yesterday, I listened to NPR.
As many of us do. Yeah.
And there was a story about a guy who was originally from Bangladesh, who discovered that during the season, so many of the people in Bangladesh grow rice. But there's a couple of a month period during which the rice is growing, when there's nothing else to be done, right? And rather than what he discovered is that rather than insisting that the man of the household stay in the community during those 2 months, he's giving them a very small, like $20 loan for the bus fare to and from the capital, or to and from the biggest large city, so that the man can, pull a rickshaw or do some other kind of work during the growing season.
Yeah.
And this has turned out to be phenomenally successful in increasing the amount of food that and just the livelihood of the family back home.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is something that this is actually revolutionary in the international development world, because it's always about, people should stay in their communities. Right. But often, or sometimes, that's not necessarily the case. But I was thinking about your friend in Tennessee there, and the fact that what she's doing is incredibly important, because during that period, there's nothing to do but wait otherwise. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say she should find that segment on NPR, find out who that guy is, and study some of his language.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. How important is that, the languaging, when you with these leaders that you talk to?
My God, and again, my degree is in marketing, right?
Yeah.
And if you've been in fundraising a lot, you're constantly thinking about, how do you articulate the case, right?
Yeah.
How do you make it compelling? So I have to say, it's incredibly important, and it's more and more important, because as companies become more sophisticated, nonprofits become more sophisticated in how they articulate, and the large ones spend more and more money on positioning and branding and all the things that big companies do. Oh, absolutely. I know there are a lot of firms that specialize in that, and even some that specialize for nonprofits. So it's very important. Now, that being said, I'm not suggesting that a small nonprofit should go out and hire a branding expert, right, or a positioning expert. But I come back to the stories, right? So there's a lot of emphasis now in our culture on storytelling, right? And coming back to the idea of storytelling being sort of the basic form of human communication, right? And so you were talking about outcomes earlier, and I think that this is related, Doug, because with you need some measure of the impact that you're having, And you also need to be able to tell the specific story about the specific person or family that you helped. And both, you need both.
It's certainly true in a lot of businesses, and I think nonprofits feel this at a whole other level, that there can be an attitude of competition that some people think they should lean into, right? Like there's only so much. It's a scarcity model for funding and for best staff or for reputation in a sector or city. And if you partner with what could be perceived as your competition, that can feel like they're going to be the ones who reap all the benefit. And so there can become a real siloed attitude around all organizations, but certainly nonprofits. And one of the areas of the book that you suggest, which is where our mutual friend Brian McLaren was interviewed in the book, is building these broad-based coalitions, right? Seeing yourself, and you actually talk about it in a number of ways, that this idea that you see yourself as a community asset for social change, and you're part of this whole flow, as opposed to being a siloed organization that needs to compete with the other nonprofits for resources and attention and all. What are your thoughts about that?
So, remember I mentioned before how many nonprofits there are in the U.S., right? Over 1 million, and the number keeps growing. Yeah. So I think, partnerships, strategic alliances, where it makes sense, mergers, which used to be like a 4-letter word in the nonprofit sector.
Right. Yeah.
But we're seeing a little bit of an uptick in activity in merging. Really? Which is good, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that the nonprofits that are going to succeed, right, in this next 15, 20 years are the ones who figure out how to partner, and not just with other nonprofits, right, but with companies in their towns and the local school and that really learn how to leverage the power that they have, the moral and ethical power that they have to really make a difference by bringing the community together rather than driving it back into silos. I really firmly believe this, and from a funding perspective, right? So again, have spent most of my career in fundraising in one way or another. And more funders, foundations in particular, but others as well, are looking for partnerships when they fund organizations. So funders love partnerships.
Meaning they're not the only one, like funding partnerships, or you're working with other
groups? What I meant was actually that nonprofits are partnering with each other to make the ask, right? That's more and more, foundations love it when nonprofits do that.
That's good advice just right there. A lot of people feel like it's the other way, like they want to be the only one and they need to get there before the other ask.
Not really. And again, I think it's a function of there's so many nonprofits, and there aren't an unlimited number of funding sources, right? So, and also if you're a small organization, right, you can have a bigger impact if you're partnering with someone else, right? It's sort of logical in a way. But it's antithetical to the culture, the nonprofit culture, which needs to change in this regard.
They do need to change in this regard. So I live in Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is one of the highest per capita nonprofit cities in the country. It's there's a lot of them here. There's a culture of nonprofits. There's funders are part of it. The business climate. It's just a place for nonprofits. And so there's a lot of conversation in the public sphere on our public radio and in other places among nonprofit leaders. And one theory is that for the most part, these smaller nonprofits should either go away or become a subsidiary of the larger ones. And we really should see a consolidation to the larger nonprofits that have best practices, where the efficiency is a lot higher, and that we don't need any more, and there should be a moratorium on how many nonprofits exist. It's just in a conversation with a bunch of nonprofit leaders I was in a couple months ago. That was the conversation. Don't start another one. Take one that currently exists and expand its work, or find one of the larger ones and incorporate what you're doing into that world, and stop the little small one-off single goal kinds of nonprofits. Do you have thoughts about that as a general movement? Do you think we should consolidate into the bigger ones? Should there be less than there are? What do you think?
I'm of two minds about it, right? I do think that there are probably too many, and that some consolidation would be a good thing. Now, do we want sort of like mega nonprofits, the Coca-Colas and Pepsi-Colas of the nonprofit world? Do we want that? I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. But I do think that some consolidation would be a good thing. And I do, I get a lot of young people come to me saying, I have this great idea. I want to start a nonprofit. And I say to them, look, that's fantastic. Before you go and start another nonprofit, please do some research and see who else out there is doing some of the things that you're thinking about doing, and go talk to them and educate yourself about what they're doing. And then after all that, if you still feel that your contribution would be unique, right, and no one wants to initially partner with you on it, then by all means, start your own. But please don't start that way. Now, I have to tell you, they're young people, right? And they're very much, obviously, if they want to start a nonprofit, they're passionate about something. And so sometimes I don't succeed in convincing them not to start it, but at least I feel like they've taken a little time to consider before they go off and do it, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
Right? It's not easy at all.
I heard an adage at one of these meetings we were at where someone said, back in the 60s, late 60s, a 20-year-old wanted to start a band. And then in the mid-'80s, 20-year-olds wanted to start nonprofits. And in the 2000s, 20-year-olds want to start a cause. And they were sort of noting this thing from a band to an organizational nonprofit to a cause that doesn't have all the infrastructure around it, a GoFundMe, one of those, all of those sort of, I'm going to do this thing, fund me for this cause, and it's going to be far more efficient than building a whole nonprofit, and you have to fill out 1099s, and you have to report to the government, and I don't want to do that. I want to sort of be off the grid in this cause that I'm a part of. Do you think that's a movement that's worth looking at, or do you think this whole fund my life, fund my cause, the GoFundMes of the world are a thing?
I think that's a really good question. I have to say I haven't really thought about this one very much, but it's great to think about it. And I think that the young people find themselves in a challenging economic environment, and it may be that part of this GoFundMe movement is driven by that. So, they don't know where to get the resources except by asking people to give them, right? So that's one thought that I have. And I think that, here's the thing, I think that if people want to make a difference, and they have a good idea, and they can get people to put money behind it, then by all means they should go for it, right? Who am I?
Right,
Someone
for sure,
spent my life trying to change the world for the better,
right? A classic adult. That's what you would be if you told a 20-year-old.
Who am I to say that they shouldn't try it?
Yeah. What do you think about this new movement of business corps, B corps,
where B corps,
somewhere in between a for-profit and a nonprofit, a betterment
so the low profit businesses.
So for people who don't know, what I understand, maybe you know it better, is that you could design a corporation where one of its chartered purposes is to bring about some benefit to society. So care for your shareholders is not the only, it's not the first and foremost obligation that a board has. So you could have a corporation that can do businessy things like Tom's Shoes and that sort of thing.
Right.
What do you think? Is there something there?
So yes, and so there are a bunch of different. So B Corps, there's a whole, like an explosion of different kinds of funding mechanisms and ideas about how to marry business and social good, right? There's an explosion of those at the moment. Whether you call it social impact or, I mean, there's the whole impact investing area, right? Which is fascinating. One impact investment I heard about recently was in Kenya, I think there's a corridor between two preserves where animals go back and forth. And by selling the carbon credits that are in the trees in that area, the local people, rather than killing the animals, are instead starting businesses that are that are suitable to their habitat. And the investor is making a return on this.
Oh.
Right. So there's a whole bunch of these different things being tried. And I say, go for it. Again, because the problems that we're trying to solve are large. There just isn't enough money to fund them all. And again, it's it's related to what I said earlier about when a nonprofit really makes the biggest impact is when it partners with a corporation or the government. So here's a way to get some of the profit motive to work for the causes that we all care about, right? And so I think there are just tremendous experiments going on, right? Whether in the end they turn out to be really major investment vehicles, no one really knows yet because it's too early. But there's a tremendous amount of interest in that and in finding other ways for nonprofits to make money, right? To have earned revenue as well as philanthropic revenue. And I always encourage our clients now to think about, are there ways that they can earn revenue? It's much easier in some kinds of nonprofits than in others. It's challenging in social service organizations. And much easier if you have a performing arts center or someplace where you can sell tickets, right? And maybe increase the price of them. But when nonprofits are planning today, I think they really should be brainstorming a lot about how could they earn some revenue.
Yeah, boy, I think you're right. I mean, it's sort of like you say to the business people, hey, you should have some greater social impact. It's the other side too, right? You say to the nonprofits, hey, you could provide you can do that. You can provide services that people pay for. And a lot of people, they really don't know. I guess when you're running a nonprofit, they do. But a lot of people who, fund a nonprofit, they don't really know how it works. They kind of think, I hear this a lot, well, as a nonprofit, you can't sell things, right? Right. That's what a lot of people think. And it kind of gets in the air that if you're going to sell something, you're going to sell it for a reduced rate. You're going to be like Goodwill or something, as opposed to, no, you can set a certain amount of your income based for your organization around the services that you provide or the things that you sell. Getting people to think about that that's really hard to do, to think about organizing your organization in such a way that you're that you're in both sides of the business, the donation side and the service side. Is that a thing? Do you feel like that's a thing about nonprofit leaders as you've interviewed them? That some get that and some don't, or is that a learnable skill?
Oh, I think it's a learnable skill. I mean, one of the most interesting examples of this, actually, in the book is the DoSomething.org, which is which teaches young people to become active citizens and volunteers. And they've got 5 million members, and they have a for-profit subsidiary called, get this, TMI Strategy.
Nice.
And because they have a tremendous amount of data about young people ages 18 to 25, because those are the ones that they're primarily working with. And so what they've done is they've created a company where they help corporations who are marketing to the 18 to 25-year-olds learn about what 18 to 25-year-olds, how they think, what they buy, and to me, that's one of the more creative earned revenue
Fascinating.
ideas that I've heard.
Fascinating. Well, if people pick up your book, they can hear these kinds of stories and
Yes.
your insights from you and Linda. But also, H2 Growth Strategies is something that's available. So if people want your services, they can find those. They can look you
Yes.
up and
Yes, they can find about us and about our book by going to h2growth.com. So H and then the number 2 and then the word growth.com.
And I'm guessing that the H comes from Hartley and Hoexter.
It
You
does,
and Linda,
yes.
your last name, H2?
Yes,
I put that
indeed it
together.
does.
Maybe
You're
everybody else
good.
got that even quicker, but I noticed that too. Well, Vivien, thank you for this conversation and congratulations on the book. I think it's really, really important and really good.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Doug. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, you are welcome.